there are so many more layers of control that our lighting designers and our lighting engineers have nowadays, that to make all the colors look correct everywhere, feels like it takes a degree in it, right? Yeah. It feels like it's really complex, but I know I've heard you talk about this. It's actually not as complex as you think about it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Gear Follows Vision podcast. This is episode 3. My name is Darren, and I just want to welcome you into this conversation that we're about to have. And overall, this podcast is designed to bring technical topics and discuss them thoroughly, from implementation to gear selection, but through the lens of vision. Right. So we here at Summit Integrated Systems, we are a design build AVL firm. We work exclusively with churches because our heartbeat is for the church and advancing the gospel. And because of that, we want to make sure that the equipment that's purchased, the design that's implemented, and even the systems and processes that churches have honor the Lord, one, but then also have great stewardship and vision for what they're accomplishing. And so everything we recommend, everything we think about and implement goes through the vision of that particular church. And so today we wanted to talk about this topic around camera looks and what the set design looks like through the camera lens. How do we implement that well? And we're going to talk about lighting, which is a bit of a departure from us. We would normally start with audio, but we thought the lighting folks needed a bone to get thrown to them. So today I've got Seth Thiessen with us. Welcome, Seth, to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And Seth, give me a little bit about who you are. I don't know our audience knows you, and we'd love for you to give us a little bit of your background. How did you get here?
Yeah, so Seth Thiessen, and I've been here at Summit for coming up on 3 years in August, but I've had a long history in church production. Started growing up as a kid. My dad's a pastor. Started a church when I was in high school, so then kind of got thrown into that. And this was as technology was really kind of starting to grab a hold in church, and projectors, PowerPoint, a small Panasonic video switcher where we could fade between two video sources blew my mind.
Wow, yeah. Did you do the dissolves and the wipes too?
No wipes, just dissolves.
Okay, just dissolves.
We did have standards. And so kind of like learned a lot through that, just being a part of that. And then went to school for audio recording, but decided I did not want to work in a studio. And we had an on-campus production company. Everyone was doing audio. No one did lighting. And I had some experience from that, just from being around the church stuff. And then I've been in, full-time ministry for close to 15 years at several different churches. And then in 2009, took a role at North Point Community Church as lighting and scenic director. And then kind of assumed the role of production director. For 9.5 years, was very integral in creating set designs, the lighting look that was at the North Point campus for 9.5 years. Kind of, took on what was there, but then slowly over time made it, what I would say was kind of my look. And so there really got to work closely with the video team and the video engineers to really dial in, okay, how does this look on camera? What do we like? What do we don't like? How are colors getting represented? And then from there, went to a creative agency. And so that was really cool because then I got to do more stuff kind of similar to this type of lighting. Then I got to be part of like video shoots. So learned a little bit more about like lighting sets. And I was I remember working with a really talented DP, and I thought my stage lighting was great, like what we were doing. And he was just like, man, your lighting sucks. And I was like, wow. I was really offended by that. And so then I pressed in with him. I'm like, well, what do you mean? And so, I learned a lot from him in that season of like soft lighting and how, bringing lights closer to subjects. But that's not something we can do in a live environment. So stage lighting it's not film lighting, but it was fun to learn a lot from him. And I still like to learn a lot from that community and, try to take parts and pieces and how can we continue to close that gap between, how film sets get lit and how live stages get lit and create that really nice lighting experience. Yeah. And then after that creative agency, we moved to Nashville, and I took on a role at Cross Point Church for a couple years and then joined the team here at Summit.
Yeah. And what do you do today here at Summit?
So I'm a solution architect. So which means we get to meet with churches all over the country and hear what they're doing for their community, what they're trying to do to reach the people that they're called to, and then hear that vision and put together gear, parts lists, put parts on paper. So that way we can help them accomplish what they've been tasked to do.
Yeah. Then you also go out and do commissioning and training with the teams,
And
because
so,
it's not just the parts and pieces, right?
Yeah. So we get to help create that high level, like, all right, here's based off of what we're hearing, here's what I think we need to do.
Yeah.
And then when the project is coming to life, closing out, we get to be back on site, work with the team, meet volunteers, train volunteers, staff, and help set them up for success.
Love it. Well, yeah, I'll give a little about myself. I don't have quite the storied history on camera with lighting, but I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and from there I was voluntold to get into AVL production by my mom to keep me out of trouble, which mostly worked. But I started on the audio side, and then that church actually started its own community theater called Freedom Community Theater, and we built it from scratch in our Family Life Center, if you're familiar with those words. And that was kind of my first foray into lighting, was with, a couple of par cans, and I think 2 Altman Lecos at that time. But from there kind of followed a journey into theatrical production. So we did some other community theater around Albuquerque, did some classes at UNM, the University of New Mexico, around theater lighting, and learned a lot about mood and focus from there. But it wasn't necessarily my passion, right? I didn't chase lighting as my career, but always have had this great affinity for, like, it creates the mood. And so took that. I was full-time at a couple of churches in St. Louis, Midwest. That's where you're originally from. Midwest is best, is what I hear.
Yeah, it's okay.
The summers can be rough. Let's just say that.
And the winters.
Anyway. So from there, I had known about Summit from my time in Albuquerque and came on Summit about 12 years ago as a project manager. At the time, that was everything but, I think, accounting and pulling wire. So I did sales, design, CAD. Was not great at CAD, functioned in CAD. And then, of course, commissioning, training, logistics, booking. We did the whole 9. So we've definitely varied the role, but since you've taken it into a more specialized, more focused role, which is pretty great. So yeah, let's jump in here. So, like, part of what I think, the misnomer is around, camera production and video productions, man, just buy a great camera nowadays. Like, they're really sweet. We've got some really cool Sony ones right here. And just point at the stage and you can capture something, right?
That's right.
But I think there's a lot more intentionality of designing the look on stage, not just with lighting, but with set pieces and all these other things. So, but let's start on the lighting pieces of it, right?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
I'd love for you to dig into, like, one, I think the number one challenge we see is getting even illumination on stage, right? Like, how do we get this? How can our pastor walk more than 3 feet and not hit a dark spot or a bright spot? So talk to me. What's your approach with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, just to kind of yes and what you just said there, talking about, like, yes, we can buy new cameras, add new lenses, but, we'll kind of link this back to, for some of our audio folks, is, we always talk about fixing the source with audio. It's like, man, if the guitar sound that's coming in, doesn't matter what PA you put up, what console you have, if the guitar tone sounds like it's, coming through a, PV amp, right, it's still going to sound like it's coming through a PV amp, on your L Acoustics or D&B PA. So same thing goes for video. And so it's like the camera's only able to capture what it sees. Mm-hmm. So if we don't address that source, so how are we lighting our subjects? What's the evenness? What's the color temperature? There's a lot that goes in, the shadows that are being created. So there's a lot there that goes into that. And so if we're not really addressing that, then it doesn't matter, how much money we spend on cameras. We're gonna put new cameras in. It's like, oh man, we can see colors a lot better, but we still have shadows, or we can see, a little more detail, but we're still not happy with how it looks. Yeah. And so addressing lighting alongside cameras is always a big win. Or even, sorry, camera people, but I would say even, before you invest in new cameras, maybe it's just a lighting upgrade that needs to happen. And that way it's not as large of a investment, but you might find that just changing out your key light fixtures, changing placement of your key light fixtures and your backlight and all of that can really improve how your cameras are capturing it.
Yeah, that's good. And you used a word there. Let's define that. So there's key light, there's fill light, backlight. In my back in my theater days in a black box theater, we would typically do a 2-point light from the front, but that doesn't seem to be the vibe anymore, really. But define for me first, like, what is key light, and then what do these other things mean?
Yeah. So if you're not that familiar with lighting, your key light is your primary light source. So it's what light is the strongest, what is doing the heavy lifting of lighting a subject. And then, like what you're talking about with, kind of that key fill is a fill light. And usually a key light is coming in from an angle, a certain direction, and your fill light is then coming in from the opposite direction to kind of smooth some of those shadows out. But you don't want to, sometimes you don't want to completely eliminate them. And that's really true with a lot of theater. That's not as true always with broadcast. That's definitely going to be a little more flat. And then there's backlight. So we want to create a little light on our shoulders here to help us separate us out from the background. And that's just something subtle. It helps with some dimensionality, because video is 2-dimensional, where when you're in the room, that's 3-dimensional. So it just helps us separate us out from the background.
That's good. So yeah, let's talk about some of those differences between broadcast and even broadcast today versus broadcast when you and I started has been different. So like I got to light a couple of really cool events for the White House. I'm old, so this was Obama and Bush days. And we put, 1K pars up. We put, 3 to 4 par bars up there. So we had 6,000 watts of pars in each location, and we just blasted that stage, right? And the metric that I was always told was 120 from the front, 80 from the back. And but that stage was glowing with light. That's not necessarily what we're going for anymore. And talk about the what and the why.
Well, yeah, and similar. I did an event for the First Lady, and we were told the same thing: 120-foot candles. So we had to rent a bunch of 2K Fresnels. This was when I was on staff at North Point. We had to rent a bunch of 2K Fresnels because we were running 40-foot candles. For our preach wash, and so it was like, okay, what are we going to do? So now we've got these cameras that have a lot more dynamic range, a lot better color rendering, how to see colors. So we're not, blasting the stage with 120-foot candles. We can do less, but with better technology, we can get away with less lighting. So, again, it goes back to when I was starting, it was, just blast the stage with light and everything's washed out. There's no depth. And now we're able to get a lot more of that in our live environments with some of the newer technology.
And that's, going back to like the vision, like I don't hear any pastors saying they want their stage blasted with light, right? That's not the vision we're hearing, right? Again, talking about the trending where you're talking about. But they all want it evenly lit. Right. And so like not a lot of times it's kind of like with PAs, right? Like there's no pastor out there's like, I want a mediocre sounding PA. No one says that. So like evenly illuminating the stage seems like a baseline, but talk about like just some nuts and bolts again. Like you're not throwing those par bars up anymore. You're not necessarily renting 2K Fresnels. So what's your approach typically on a stage to get that even illumination?
So, and one great thing is LED technology has advanced is we've got a fixed color point that we can lean on. My early days of getting out, we had ETC Source 4s, was mostly what we were using for our key light. But as we start to dim those fixtures, we are also changing that white balance, that white point. So that was always a challenge. You'd have to kind of really do a lot of photometric math to figure out, okay, how far am I throwing? What's the right lens that I need to get the right brightness at that distance.
Yeah.
So I would always approach, I started with, that we were talking about that traditional kind of 2-point lighting. Yeah. So key fill. Mm-hmm. And over time, I've kind of drifted more towards especially for a teaching wash. Mm-hmm. So when I think teaching wash, I want it to be very emotionally neutral. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want lighting to be creating any additional emotion unless there's a moment that it calls for it specifically. Mm-hmm. So I do want it a little more flat. I want to be mindful of shadows that we're creating. And so that's where, with that 2-point lighting, we'd kind of create, little face modeling. So now kind of shifting to a little bit more of a straight on approach. Kind of helps eliminate that. But then with that straight on approach, you need to be mindful of, okay, what's this, what kind of shadows are getting created here, right here underneath the eyes, like what kind of those shadows. So, your pastor doesn't have to talk like this.
Yeah. And every pastor is different with that too.
Yeah. Most of the time it's still ellipsoidals that we're doing. There are some LED Fresnels that are slowly starting to get the brightness at the throw distance. Because as what I was talking about earlier is my friend who told me that my stage lighting sucked. Yeah. He's used to putting a light, if the frame ends right here, he's putting a light or, a light behind diffusion right here.
Yeah.
So we don't have that luxury. I can't put a huge softbox right here.
No, that'd be awkward.
It would look fantastic, but yes, I don't think overall
awkward for the people in the room. Yes. Maybe with the pastor with the arm extension thing.
Yes.
Yeah, that'd be weird.
So that's where we're still relying on ellipsoidals because we need that throw distance.
Yeah.
Some of the LED Fresnels are getting bright enough. And so that ellipsoidal is going to be a little harsh. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we want to try to soften it up, put a little diffusion in that front end. Yeah. We want to put a little diffusion in the gel holder there to just kind of soften it up, try to alleviate some of those shadows.
Yeah.
But with that straight on, I'm also kind of putting on some really, some side fills. Mm-hmm. And also thinking about where's your primary audience, where are your cameras at too? Because if I only have one camera, like right here, mm-hmm. I'm looking straight down one camera. Mm-hmm. If I only have one light coming right, directly on, that's going to be great. But if I had only one light coming from right here or over here, now I'm going to create some shadows. And so thinking through where your camera location is, so that way, if your communicator looks directly at the camera or turns to look at another camera, their face is, like I said, emotionally neutral. Allow them to bring the emotion and everything, and not let us. In that, I feel like it's our responsibility in that moment not to create the emotion, but to support the emotion that's coming from the communicator.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so that approach is, again, more of like a softbox potentially, front light. I mean, to use that, a term that doesn't apply in church, but more of a softbox front key light, and then you use some fill lights from the sides.
Yep.
Maybe not quite at a 90 degree, but somewhere off to the side.
Yep.
So, I mean, let me ask you, what's the perfect angle for your key light?
Great question.
It's not 45.
So it's not really 45. Now it's, pushing out to 35 degrees, 30, some film, live TV events, they're going all the way down to 22 degrees. Mm-hmm. But that's going to be tough because I guarantee your pastor's going to hate it. Mm-hmm. Because if you think how low 22 degrees gets, now it's like this light is coming straight in at their eyes, and where they were used to seeing people,
right?
Now all of a sudden they're looking more into the lights. So going from 45, bringing it slowly down, that's definitely a conversation you're going to want to have with your pastor or any of the communicators on stage of, casting that vision of why you want to do that, how it's going to help that camera image, and how it's going to look online and in the room or to other campuses. But they're going to have to get used to it and it's maybe not something you want to just do, on a random Wednesday and, hope that they are okay with it on a Sunday.
No, let's be honest. We're doing it Saturday night. Night before we walk in. No rehearsal. Just locked in.
Just go for it.
It reminds me of Mark Lowry. I don't know how old people are listening to this,
that's a
but
throwback.
But he always talked about if the lights were too low, it felt like he was singing and trying to do comedy to an oncoming train, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want that vibe for your pastor trying to connect with people.
Yeah.
I think the other downside is, of course, like the lower that gets, the more it's going to spill up staged, right?
Correct.
And most churches don't have 60 feet of stage to deal with like a theater might.
Yep.
And so you're going to start to wash this out. So let's pivot here. Like, how important is it? Again, we're not necessarily blasting the stage with light anymore. So how important is it to have contrast and depth and dimension in these stage designs for that look on camera?
Yeah. So that was definitely something that we were always fighting at North Point with, I think we'd gotten our key light to around 30 degrees.
Okay.
We mounted a new pipe, further back to get the angle that we wanted.
Yeah.
Then again, like I said, we flattened that angle out. Now we're throwing more light on our sets that we had, spent a lot of time designing, building.
They're going to be washing out an LED wall that was a pretty penny to put in the first place. Right?
Yeah. So now we get a little more advantage with LED, but when you start to wash it out, you start to see some of that, those masking screens that go on the front of them.
Yeah.
And seams on the LED screens. So it's not just like, cool, we'll just turn the LED wall on and it will all go away.
Right.
No, sometimes that stuff is still visible.
Yeah.
And so now you're chasing a different problem. So we were using ellipsoidals. So we would shutter cut. So
there we go.
For those that are not familiar with Lecos, is there are 4 shutters in a Leco. And so you can mechanically block the light out. And the first time you do it, it's backwards. So the bottom one starts to, you start to push the bottom one in and the top of the light starts to cut out. And so we just did our best to get it off of the things where we didn't want it, but sometimes there was spill. And so with that, then we would then try to light up the scenic elements that we had behind us with different styles of lighting, either with, some color from an LED par or a different LED fixture, throw a gobo on it, from a moving light to create some texture, some patterns, some highlights, some lowlights, just something to, we don't want the background to be the dominant focus, but just something that as that camera sees it, there's a little bit of subtle interest going on back there.
And keeping the first things, right? Like,
that's right.
Make sure your pastor is lit first.
Yep.
Right? Make sure then the worship leader for worship is lit first, and then we can make it look beautiful behind them.
Yeah.
Right? But no, if pastor's in the dark, nobody cares how great that gobo looks on the drums.
Yep.
So
naturally, our eye is always drawn to the brightest thing in the room. So if your IMAX screens are LEDs and you've got those cranked up to 100, doesn't matter. Your eye's always going to be drawn away from that. Or if you've got an LED screen behind your communicator or pastor, that's your eye's going to be drawn to that and away from them. So you need to think like, where do we want to draw our focus? What's the most important thing that we want people's attention on? Yeah. And those are just the balances that we play. And usually when I'm dialing in a look, I'm not doing it with my eye. I've got, my QC monitor off to the side, and I'm making all those brightness adjustments for the background. Our key light's dialed. Yeah. It's like we had that, like you push the key light fader up and that was it. We knew f-stop for the cameras. Yeah. Where we need to be.
We don't need any creativity in that.
We don't need any creativity in that.
Push play. And
that
go.
one's there. Yep. But then the creativity came in the background and what we were doing around it to support. But that was all getting dialed in. I would dial that all in through the monitor. Yeah. And then look at the room and say like, okay, is it drastically off? Right. Or hopefully we've got it dialed in so we're within the ballpark.
I think that's the next level tip for the folks listening who are like, man, I want to take this to the next level, right? It's like I can make something look incredible in person, and it won't translate through the camera. And so the next best thing to do, the next step is get the monitor that the video team is also looking at and telling you that it looks like trash. Get one of those, put it at the lighting monitor. Then you can see if things are peaking, if they're too bright, if they're too dim, if it's distracting, if there's, again, there could be a little gap in your coverage of the pastor that you need to go fix, and you won't see it till you see it on the camera because your eye has a massive dynamic range.
Absolutely. And
your camera does not.
When I first got to North Point, I had to build trust with Brendan, who was the lead video engineer. And so that took time a little bit. I didn't just come in like right away and it's like, I want to change all this. But there was things definitely. I was like, all right, let's make some tweaks. I think we can get a better looking image out of this.
Yeah.
And so it just took time working with him. Like, all right, hey, let's try this. Something also to think about is like, if you're trying something new, is like, think about like what Sunday you're trying it on.
Or a youth service on a Wednesday. Can I suggest
even that, or, and maybe you don't do iMag for those, but fire the cameras up anyways. And, call in a camera volunteer to help, just like, hey, just follow this person around on stage. We just want to see how it looks to see, so find those low risk opportunities to take chances, try something new.
Yeah. So like, I think upstage, right? So we've got pasture lit, you talked about using color and texture upstage. Obviously there's some scenic elements that were a little more common when you and I were on staff at churches. And now a lot of times we have an LED screen. Right?
Yeah.
And so, that reminds me that like, there are so many more layers of control that our lighting designers and our lighting engineers have nowadays, that to make all the colors look correct everywhere.
Yep.
Feels like it takes a degree in it, right? Yeah. It feels like it's really complex, but I know I've heard you talk about this. It's actually not as complex as you think about it. But just to highlight a few, right? You have the camera that has a white point. You have a front lighting fixture that has a white point that, thankfully, like you said, is not dimming anymore. And young kids nowadays don't even know what a gel frame is. But you've got the LED screen, the lights, the house lights, and you've got the other LED pars that are probably not the same white point as your front light. And so, like, how do you go about balancing all that and making colors true? Because I think that's the goal, right? Is to make colors true everywhere.
Yeah. So that's definitely a conversation and a journey you'll have to go on with your video team, or if it's just you, that's the sometimes it's like, yes, churches have a video engineer, lighting director. Sometimes it's just a single person.
Yeah,
that's
one guy who
works
at UPS part-time. Right?
Yep. Our team that was looking at the shading monitor, they had a Sony OLED, and it looked fantastic, and it was color calibrated. And that was the same monitor that the other team looked at as they were, making sure all the, camera, everything looking out, going to all the other campuses.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, we need one of these at lighting. Because as we're dialing in these lighting looks, I want to make sure that like what I'm seeing, what our shader sees, what master control sees, it is we're all looking at that same picture. So it's like our single source of truth.
Yeah.
So that is very important. So, and they were all color calibrated. And so from there, we had to kind of define our white point. While I was still there, it was still incandescent source force, but we were using half CTB. So
your source for was at what intensity?
We were close to full intensity.
Okay.
We had kind of, they were source force zooms. So kind of going back to that photometric math, we were able to kind of keep our fixture at full to run, get the max color temperature out of our lamp.
Yeah.
And then we would adjust the zoom to either, because the more we zoom out, the dimmer the light gets, the more we zoom in, the brighter the light gets. So we would, as we were doing our focus, we would play with that zoom to kind of, even that field out.
Yeah. So half CTB back in that day, what does that bring you up to from a number standpoint?
We were like getting up to 4,000 on a good day.
Right.
So it's like we still were at 4,000. Every other LED fixture, moving light that we had on stage was 5,000 and above. So when I made that, we were talking earlier about like, hey, it's purple in the room, but it's blue on camera. Well, because our white point is so low.
Yeah.
And so we were talking about white balance and how important that is. So when you're dealing with multiple different light sources, I mean, your LED is a light source, essentially.
Yep.
So we want to define what is our white point, like where's, what is true white.
Yeah.
And so I always like to start with the key light, because that's what we're going to see. So we take that and we then start working with our cameras and getting that dialed in.
Yeah.
And then once we get that right, then we start looking at our LED screen. Yeah. How does that reproduce? Sometimes you're dealing with an LED screen in the middle, projection on the side. Now you've got two different, you've got a light source that's creating light and a light source and a image that's reflecting light. So your projector screen's reflecting light. So now You just take steps, baby steps. It's all right, let's make this change. I have never been in an environment where I haven't been able to get everything to look perfect all the way through. Our technology is getting better and better.
I think that's part of that is defining the win.
Yes.
Right? Like you start with, what do we want the key light to look like, right? Because that for some churches can be, they want it to feel warmer and more inviting, like it's a little more of a homey environment. Others are like, we want picture, color correctness all the way through. But there are compromises, right? If a church wants that homey environment and they want, ultimately they won't know the number, but you'll help them lead, like, well, that might be like 4,000 Kelvin, which means your other sources might, again, we're gonna have a little bit of a shift in color upstream. Or they might say like, no, we want this, TV accurate, color accurate everywhere. And then that shifts up into the 5,600 range ish. Although I don't think we've left a project of 5,600 that I know of, maybe one or two, right? Yeah. But that can start to feel cold. So there's this balance of like the people in the room and then the people through the camera that ultimately the church has to define like what's the most important.
And for us, my time at North Point, the audience through the lens, we leaned heavier towards the lens. The auditorium sat about 2,500 people. Yeah. But then we knew that there was over 50,000 people experiencing on the other side of that lens.
Right.
And still to this day, people are still, people keep seeing it. Mm-hmm. So that's where we had to kind of consciously make that choice of like, hey, we're going to lean a little bit more towards how it looks and feels on camera. Yeah. We don't want to abandon the room. No. We still want the room to have a really great experience. Yeah. But if we're going to be okay with some color discrepancies on, visually in the room to the camera, because that was the larger audience, knowing that the reach was that big.
And it comes back down to vision, right? There are churches who are in the middle of that transition of how many people are in the room versus through the lens. And they might need to redefine, hey, what is our expectation here? And so, man, Seth, that was jam-packed, full of great information. Thanks for unpacking that with us. For those of you, thanks for joining us on this podcast, the Gear Falls Vision podcast. Check us out, summitavl.com. If you're on YouTube, check out some of our other podcasts, and we hope to see you again.